Well, hello and welcome from Nat this time at the beginning to another episode of Retropower Uncut. It's episode 80, apparently Jamie's just told me, so gosh, we're clocking on through them. And it's been a ridiculously busy week, pretty manic and lots going on. We're going to start with Project 1, as it is now known, Mark 1 Escort, which is now on the jig. You saw it last week blasted and me giving it a little appraisal where I was explaining about the state of the panels on it and the amount of repair work needed. I've seen a few comments online after we posted some pictures of it and some panels that have arrived, which I'll talk about in a minute, and sort of talking about the fact that it triggers broom and lots of things there. I'll explain a little bit about the thought process behind why we're going about repairing this the way we are going about repairing it. A lot of the sections of this car would be repairable on their own. It would be possible to put small repair sections in all over the place on this car and make it to a pretty good standard. The problem is, whenever you do that, obviously there's quite a time implication of doing that, but also you leave seams that have corrosion in them and potential corrosion in them untouched. So you could put a huge number of hours, at least 500 hours of metalwork into a body shell and then actually still be leaving stones unturned, so to speak. Whereas if you replace whole panels, by virtue of doing that, you open up the seams, and at that point you've eliminated any possibility of any rust remaining in seams. So anyway, the panel support for these is enormous, so basically every panel is available now. In fact, I think literally every panel is available now, all via Magnum Panels, who manufacture them. Well, they have them manufactured in the Far East, and the panels are actually very good. Gone are the days where the fit was terrible. They're actually, by and large, there are one or two better than others, but by and large, they're actually very, very good panels. We've used a number of them before when we built Gordon Murray's car, and actually, by and large, the panels were extremely good. So what we had done is gone around the country a little bit, tracking down stock, and found that Evans and Son Rallying, Ian Evans, had a very good stock of Magnum panels. And he had basically every panel we needed in stock. I dotted about a little bit people who had some of the panels in stock. He had everything in stock, literally every panel we needed. So we put a very big panel order into him, and he brought those up on Tuesday. And you'll be able to see a little, we laid them out as a little spatchcocked escort, as I think somebody described it, which was quite a good description. So yeah, we've got all the panels now. They're all stacked up on the mezzanine up there out of the way. And the next step is we need to create the jig, hence why the car's here. Now I've now drawn the Select jig bed on CAD, and I've drawn the beams, these beam units here. If you need to know more about Select jigs, we did a little autofocus episode. The most recent autofocus episode we've done is on jigs and why we use them and what we use them for, and here's a really good example. But I've drawn the beams and I've drawn the bed in CAD now, so I can drop the beams onto the bed in any of the positions they can go in on CAD and draw the fixtures on CAD, which is a nice step forward because it means I can then draw all these sub-assemblies, like here's the beginnings of one of the front strut tower assemblies. I can draw all these bits on CAD, and then I can CNC plasma cut the plates, and then I can just give Tom, in this case, the drawing of the parts, and he can actually make them to drawing, and it's just a nice way of doing it. So we've got a lot of the fixtures in place now. We've still got quite a bit to do, but we've got I've got door pin fixtures which I've set up, which unbolt, so they come off and out of the way. They hold the A-posts. They hold the A-posts via the door pins in place, and they also give a datum for the sill base, and then the same at the back. And those tall towers you can see by the B-post will be bolted. I'll run around here to explain. These will be bolted. These will have a plate that bolts onto the door striker plate here, and that will be bolted to this upright. And then I'm also going to have a piece that comes over with a clamp that will go onto the door aperture there, and also a height reference for the gutter there. And as you can see, it's already got a sill support there, and then it's also going to have a box which bolts on between those two, which has clamp points for the door, the sill to floor flange there, which will mean that when we put the floor in, without the sill there, then those clamp points will enable us to clamp that sill flange, the inner sill, if you like, the top edge of the floor pan where it comes up and forms the inner sill. It will enable us to clamp that in place so that that's at the correct height when we sit the floor onto the new chassis rails and attach it down there. But yeah, basically we are going to be building 90-ish% of the shell from panels, just because it's nicer, it's a better way of doing it than trying to do repair work on the individual areas that need repairing. And as I say, the problem with this car is that every single panel pretty much, give or take, you know, there's one or two that don't fit that, but almost every single panel on the car has a hole in it somewhere. And then to exacerbate that, it also has bits of rust in the seams, which there's just, by the time you're putting an enormous number of hours of fabrication into the body shell, there is no point taking any risk on any remaining rust, when the alternative is we could just replace all the panels and make sure there's no chance of any rust in there. So that's what we're doing. And what I should also add is that the other reason for making sure that we have all this fixturing done correctly is we have a second one of these to build. So it's worth spending the hours, it's worth spending probably about a week's work when it's all done on doing all the fixturing properly, so that we then have all that fixturing ready for the second car, which then offsets the cost a little bit across the two cars. So it's worth doing, and it means that we get a really repeatable result. It means that everything goes in the right place, and it should speed the fabrication up markedly, because we just know that the panels are in the right places. It cuts down, I think I summed it up the other day saying the fabrication of the fixtures, the time taken on that is time taken away from the running around the car scratching your head with a tape measure time, which is what normally ends up happening when we're trying to measure stuff and juggle all the dimensions and work out where an error's come from, which is pretty standard with these things. The body shells were never that accurate, so they had errors to start with, and then it becomes quite a challenge to work out what was an original error and what's an introduced error. So we cut all that out if we fixture everything. So that's what we're doing with this, and that's where we're at. You'll see some progress next week, I think, with the beginnings of some panel work. So moving on from that, no, hang on, I've missed a little bit here. We've talked about panels from Evans & Son. What I should also add is that we have also had the first shipment of parts for the running gear, because obviously we're going to need the very basic building blocks of the running gear quite soon in the process. So in tandem with receiving the panels, we've also received the basic building blocks of the running gear, i.e. front cross member, steering rack, top mounts, because we're using roller bearing rubber mounted top mounts on the front. We use, as you'll be aware, the car's going independent rear end. We use a rubber mounted spherical bearing top mount on the back, so we've got those as well from Motorsport Tools, and a variety of other bits and bobs as well. But basically the building blocks of the running gear, the coilovers, which are going all around, remote reservoir dampers, are ordered they're being built by Nitron, and they're in process now. They've been ordered, they're in process. I can't remember what the lead time is, a few weeks. But yeah, Nitron are building the dampers. So other things are progressing in the background. The other thing is that Sherwood Engines, Paul at Sherwood Engines, we've been talking to him, and he is building the engine for this car and the engine for the other, the sister car to this car. He is building their 2.1 litre Cosworth BDG engines, all brand new blocks, brand new heads, all built from all new components, and he's building those, and he's also those orders are in place as well. So it's starters orders on all fronts. So yeah, watch this space, lots to happen. So we'll move on, we'll wander past the car we won't be talking about, and then we will have a pause at the Sherwood Jaguar. I'm going to wander around our welder and think I haven't really tidied the workshop up very well, and I have got a coffee, and I know people will laugh about my walking around with a coffee. This is my second coffee of the day, but I didn't get my first one until 2:30 this afternoon, so I'm allowed to walk around with a coffee. The Sherwood Jaguar, Stu, as always, has been busy, needless to say. He has finished the doors. He's fitted the door skin to the door now. The door skin's been fitted to the door, and he's been doing some work on the edges. He's got a little bit more work to do on the shuts, on the gaps, but he's very, very close now. And then he's got a metal finish the door as well, planish it all out and tidy it up. But basically, yes, the door skin is on. It pretty much fits the hole. And it's pretty close to being done. I think he's moved on from that bit to give himself a bit of respite from the metal finishing of the door skin for a bit. But yeah, that's now on. He's done the C-pillar, he's welded in the section on the C-pillar, got all that in place. It's tacked to the roof, it's welded to the quarter, MIG welded to the quarter, going back to the old welding game here. Yeah, it's MIG welded to the quarter because there's no access to the back of it. And then he's also, within this section that you now can't see, he's built the structural pillar that carries the bottom, that extends off the bottom like a foot to the C-pillar, which sits onto the inner arch tub, and he's built that structure behind there, and that's all now enclosed. And he's finished off the rear window shut line into that and the gutter section, just generally finished off the metalwork there, and then moved on to the quarter panel, which he was welding yesterday. He's been carrying on with that today, but I noticed he was welding this yesterday, and he's welded at the front, done a lovely job of that. We're onto the return that goes into the shut, because we kept the returns off the original B pillar just because they're quite an awkward shape. They're curved in both planes, and they've got a triple step in them, which is very difficult to shape without a press tool or a lot of trauma and potential to scrap the parts. So it was actually made more sense to reuse the very front edge off the original B post, which he's done both sides. So he's welded, there's a weld down here, which is TIG weld down there, which is attaching the cut-off front of the original B post onto the new quarter. And then he's shaped along here, and he's done the very top section. I think we talked about this before. He's done the very top section separate to the rest of the quarter, so that he doesn't risk scrapping this bit if this bit goes wrong. It hasn't gone wrong. He's got it all in place. Again, it's just an awkward shape, so he wanted to do that separately. Got that in place, TIG welded it up. That's all sat there now, ready for further welding and making the back bit. So yeah, that's all progressing really nicely. So yeah, more of the same really on this one. Next week we'll be continuing along the same lines. I'm going to make Jamie walk backwards over all sorts of things that will potentially trip him up, and I'm going to wander around here, and we'll talk now briefly about Land Cruiser, because here it is. It's changed a little bit since last time. I'm going to elaborate on a little bit of a tangent. For once, I never do that, but we'll elaborate on a slight tangent here. But yeah, Tom finished off literally the last sort of literally few minutes of metalwork on this on Monday, and then this morning, I'm just trying to think whether there was an intermediate stage here. I'm just getting in a muddle. It's been a busy day. This morning, I put this in the blast room and blasted it and zinc metal sprayed it. And then I also, I'll come back to that in a minute, also blasted the periphery and all the difficult to clean up manually areas of the full panel set for it, which is quite a lot of panels. So I'm sure Jamie will put in a little shot of the the Krypton Factor crystal maze in the paint booth, because there's quite a lot of panels in there at the minute, because Gaz has just epoxied all the panel set following the blasting. So yeah, we've got all the panels now and the body tub. Well, nearly all the panels. There's one or two. I couldn't blast the bonnet. It was too flimsy to blast the bonnet. So he's having to manually prep all the edges on that. So there's quite a lot of hours involved that would be sped up by blasting, but too much risk of damage on the return edges of the bonnet will stretch them. So he's got some manual prep to do there, but basically it'll be forging ahead with the body prep now. Going back to the zinc metal spray, we get a lot of questions about this. I've actually zinc metal sprayed the inside of the shell as well as the underside on this, purely because it's likely, being an off-road vehicle, it's likely at some point to end up wet inside. And you know, it's that sort of vehicle. It's going to get dirty inside, it's going to get scuffed inside, it's going to get things thrown in the back of it. And it makes sense to give it a pretty tough finish. So it's unusually, rather than it being grovelling around under the car, you can actually see the zinc metal sprayed finish. It's basically sprayed galvanising. I've wobbled on about it on all manner of videos, but I'll touch on it again because we still get lots of questions about it. Basically, we re-blast the body shell, and then immediately following the re-blasting, we spray it using a Metco flame spray gun. which is powered by compressed air and oxygen and propane, and it melts 1/8 inch diameter pure zinc wire and atomizes the molten zinc, and blows it onto the surface of the freshly blasted steel, which it then adheres to, and basically metallizes the surface. And it's basically a sprayed version of galvanizing. But it means the rot resistance of the car is then unbelievable. I've mentioned it before, but I will again because I'm aware we get new viewers now and again. We've had a salt spray test done on the final finish, which would be the zinc metal spray over blasted steel with an etch or epoxy primer. I think the salt spray test was actually done with an etch primer rather than an epoxy, and then U-Pole Raptor coating over that. We had those salt spray tested on a standard test, which is where there's a coupon. I can't remember the dimension, roughly that by that, which is then coated and then scribed back to the bare steel, and then it's put in the environmental test chamber, where it's subject to basically a hot salt water mist, and that sample undertook 3,000 hours in the salt spray test chamber, in the accelerated test chamber, with 0 red corrosion at the end of 3,000 hours test. At that point we were advised there was no point testing further. That's just, that's pretty much, in terms of a vehicle, that's basically permanent. A typical car manufacturer, for the most durable parts on the car, would be looking at to pass a test of 500 hours in that chamber, and this coating has withstood 3,000 hours with 0 red corrosion. Give you an idea, if you put a zinc plated nut and bolt in there for 3,000 hours, you pretty much won't even reckon. If you put an M10 nut and bolt in a test chamber with a zinc plated M10 nut and bolt in a test chamber for 3,000 hours, it will look like a blob. It won't even look like a bolt anymore. So to do that, it's pretty impressive. So that's why we do this, and that's why we sprayed the whole car. It just means it's going to be super, super durable. No possibility of rust ever, basically now. And which when it's a Land Cruiser BJ or FJ40, that's quite nice to know, because they were kind of rot prone. So yeah, that's what we've done with that. The panels are all in the booth. They are now epoxy. Gaz has literally just finished epoxying those. Just over to my right, as you've probably seen as we walk past, is a full floor pan from Mark 1 Escort nestling there, actually, just out of shot. And then the other thing that's been going on in the booth, I'm just trying to work out whether I've missed anything, probably have, but the other thing that's been going on in the booth is the Morris Minor. We now have half of the panels painted, we have the body shell painted, and the other half of the panels waiting to be painted. If it hadn't been for all the blasting and things going on, we probably would have painted them by now, but as it is, because I was doing the blasting, we then had quite a large pile of panels that needed epoxy coating, and that meant that Gaz needed to get on an epoxy coat those, which took up the booth, which meant he couldn't then paint the Morris panels. But I think he will probably be getting on to painting those tomorrow, all being well, although there's quite a lot of setup time. Well, I think he's more than halfway to getting them set up now, but the rear wings for the Morris are particularly difficult to hold on panel stands. Very little get hold of, and they're quite wobbly, so he's had to go to quite a large trouble to basically make a way of holding them properly, so that nothing can go wrong while he's painting them. But at that point, it would be a good time to hand over to Cal, because Cal will then be able to show you the finished painted Morris, and hopefully, if all's gone to plan, it might even be rolling. I might be pushing my luck there, because as we came through, it was kind of on the cusp. We'll see. It'll be very, very close to rolling if it isn't rolling. So at that point, I'll see you again soon, and I'm going to hand over to Cal.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Nat. And I don't know if you could hear in the background, while he was doing his bit, the general swearing and joyous screams that were probably coming from in here as we frantically tried to get this rolling, which, as you can see, we have. So this sort of is concluding what is an insanely busy week, or it seems to have been. You probably noticed that the amount of stuff that Nat talked about through there was massive, and then the amount of stuff that's gone on here is insane as well. So last week, this wasn't even painted. I think those that follow us on social, so Facebook, Instagram, will have already seen some pictures of it painted. So yeah, here it is. Probably not the colour most people were expecting. I'm really happy with it. It's one of those that's actually split opinion here. I've always been really in favour of it. It's kind of split the opinion of the guys, and I've always said I think when you see it, you'll come around to it. And it stems obviously from the customer's choice primarily. We're sort of doing what I would describe as a modern take on a 70s hot rod sort of look. And from very early on, he was keen on purple. We did some renders for the project, none of which were in purple, to try and explore a few different avenues, but it all kept coming back to purple. He talks about Ford purple velvet, which I'm not mad keen on, so we looked at doing some kind of variations on that theme that pops a bit more and I felt had a slightly more modern look to it. And the colour we've eventually gone for is actually a custom mix we've done. It's based on the BMW / Rolls-Royce Twilight purple colour, which is it's pretty much a current model Rolls and BMW colour. And then we've put quite a lot of an additional crystal pearl additive in it, which has given it a much stronger flip between how it looks in the light and how it looks in the shadow. And it's given it a slightly bluer tone, just takes it a little bit away from the slightly pinker end of the spectrum that the standard colour has. So yeah, absolutely loving that. And then yeah, we brought this shell through here today. Must have been through here about 11 o'clock in the morning, I think. It must be about 5 o'clock now, we've just gone 4. And yeah, we've just been getting everything in it, and because we've planned through everything reasonably well in terms of the subframes, engine, gearbox, everything was ready to go, so it's just been a case of getting it all bolted in. So although it's resting on some metal bars at the moment, which are keeping it at this ride height for the moment until we get the final coilovers made, it is possible to roll it round. So what we've decided to do on this one is get it rolling, get all the panels bolted on, and do that before we do the wet sanding and buffing of the paintwork. For a couple of reasons. A, it's easier to do the flatting and polishing of the panels with the panels on the car, and we wanted to do the final fit up of all those panels in here, and B, it's just easier to roll it around with it actually on its wheels rather than on a trolley. So it just made sense to get it in here, get some of the parts on it. It also frees up a bit of storage space as well. Get it rolling, get the rest of the panels on, which Gaz has just painted today. And then we're going to get this back through into the body shop sometime next week, I would imagine. Once we've got all the doors fitted up and latching and the bonnet and boot lid and wings on, and then they'll go through, wet sand it all, polish it all up, and then we'll get it back round in here to do the final build. So extremely exciting times on this one, and I can't wait to see it all sort of take shape. We've obviously done a hell of a lot in the dry build stage when it was bare metal. We built almost everything mechanically on it then, so the mechanical side of things should go together reasonably straightforward. I've no doubt there'll be some complications, there always is, but yeah, looking forward to getting stuck into it. And elsewhere, all go. I'll start with the VR6 Golf. We fired that up. I think I actually fired that up for the first time when Nat was doing his part of the video last week. I don't know if you could hear it in the background, but we went through all of our sort of final pre-flight checks, did a couple of little fault finding bits on it. There were a couple of electronic issues we had to resolve, and then yeah, we had a base map already ready to go on it for the OMEX ECU that it's running, and then yeah, it fired up. Actually, in terms of a first fire up on a sort of base map, it fired up incredibly well and just sat there idling. Pressures were good, temperatures were good. Not really any complaints on that. So next step really on that is going to be actually getting out and getting some miles on it. And talking of getting some miles on things, the Jag Project Utah I drove, I think, for the first time. I can't remember if I drove it last week, but I don't think I did. So, or if I did, it was the end of the week. So I've been getting some miles on Utah, which has also gone really well. I did a couple of miles on it today. Took it down to an MOT place, got it on there, got it all checked over there. Nice to get a second set of eyes over these things, even though obviously we go to great lengths to make sure they're built to the highest standard. So yeah, that shakedown's gone as well as you could hope for, really. Couple of minor things, as there's always going to be first time out. I wanted to have another review of the tracking. The steering just feels a little bit wandery on it, and I don't know whether it's just that we haven't really set the tracking up super accurately. We've done it with some basic old Dunlop tracking gauges, but I haven't strung it out. We don't, as you can probably guess by me saying strung it out, we haven't got laser alignment here, so we do the old-fashioned way of just stringing down each side of the car with parallel lines, centered on the center line of the car, and then we can work out everything from there, which we haven't done yet. So it might be that, or it might be that there's still a little bit too much movement in the rack mount bushes, so we might machine solid mount for the steering rack. But it's definitely either tracking or a slight play in the steering, because it's generally fine, but you can feel when you go over certain undulations it just pulls a little bit to the side. We're 100% sure the bump steer is fine, because we've been all through all of that when we were doing the design for the steering arms. So there's that. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I went through some final electronic setup on it. One of the things I've been meaning to do for ages, which I hadn't got around to, was programming the PDM to do the screen wash. Now, when we built the car, we wanted to use the original indicator stalk, which only does main beam, dip beam, toggle between the two, and indicate. The screen wash is a foot. It's just literally a mechanical pump that you pump with your foot. And I didn't really want an electrical switch foot pump, so I was trying to come up with a neat way of doing it, and the interior design didn't really lend itself to having a button somewhere that was well and within reach. I could put it in the console, but it would be well out of reach. Could put it under the dash, would also be quite well out of reach. So I decided a while ago that we would program the PDM so we could also use the same stalk to do the screen wash functionality. This is a great demonstration of where PDMs come, into their own. So although there's only one electrical contact, open and closed contact for the main beam, I've now programmed it so if you hold that in, it does for more than half a second, it does the screen wash. If you do anything less than half a second, it just toggles the main beam on and off. And it's programmed so that the main beam toggle is on what they call the falling edge. So not when the contact is made, but when the contact's broken, is when it triggers the toggle between main and dip, which means that when you hold the stalk in to get past the half second to make the screen wash work, it doesn't toggle the dip and main beam, if that makes sense. So that's how the function works on that. You've got both items operated from the same single open and close contact switch. So that works fine. I went through all of the lights. I just needed to, because we were testing out the main beam, we hadn't programmed the hazards on it, so that's now done. Gone through all of that. And yeah, we're literally just into the test driving phase now. I'm waiting for the wing mirrors to be machined. I think they're literally being machined today, if not tomorrow, out of brass for the sort of hangers that hold the wing mirrors. They're one of the last things to go on. Jim was just fitting, speaking of billet stuff, the bezels in the boot this week as well. The little bezels we had machined to go around where the boot hinges go, and also around the boot latch, so they've been polished up and fitted and they look really smart. That's just finished off the boot installation nicely. So that's that. What else? The Land Cruiser. I'm looking over here constantly because I'm actually looking at the things that are going on. Jim's stripping down the chassis for the Land Cruiser at the minute. That obviously showed the body, which is now ready to prep for paint. Jim's stripping down the chassis. We're going to do all the axle rebuilds on that. The first job will be stripping and blasting and powder coating the casings. The chassis will also be blasted and powder coated, so we're basically stripping all the mechanical components down. And then the other day we took the engine and gearbox off. The gearbox is ready to go away to be rebuilt. Adam's been stripping the engine down over the course of yesterday and today. That is now just a bare block and all in its component parts. Looks in really good condition, which is great. We kind of hoped it would be. Those 1UZ-V8s are pretty bulletproof, so unless something's actually been ingested by the engine at some stage, you'd hope they'd be pretty good. And it does look that that's the case, so it should be. I'm tempting fate here, a straightforward rebuild. So we're going to start the process of rebuilding that, which we'll cover over the coming weeks. Mustang, we finally got the other day a missing link that we've been waiting for a while, which is the stainless steel channels that hold the seal that goes around the door aperture, runs up the A-pillar around the roof and down the C-pillar. And it's one of the few parts you can't get new. You can get them new for a fastback, but not for the coupe. So we've been trying to find a decent set used in the UK, which hasn't been particularly straightforward, but we managed to get a set the other week. So John's been cleaning them up, getting those ready to fit, to put the seals on. And Jim finished off the exhaust, which I think he'd almost done last week. He was just doing the tailpipes. Scott was fully welding everything, but that's done now. Look, really happy with how that looks. You can't see the exhaust at all when you look at the car from normal angles, but the tailpipe's just sort of flush with the valance. So I'm happy that the airflow is still going to take the fumes away, because there's none of the tailpipe above the valance line. It's just slashed at such an angle that any normal viewing angle of the car, you can't see it. So that's worked out great. We'll be pretty close to fire up on that. And speaking of fire up, I reckon this is going to be fired up tomorrow. We've literally been going through the last bits, just finishing off the coolant plumbing. There was a few adapters and bungs we needed to do on the oil pump. We were just waiting for some plating back. That was what was holding up most of that, is some zinc plated parts, the idler pulley for the belt train, some bungs for the oil pump. There was some part for the cooling system, I can't remember what that was now. But we're almost all together on that now, so hopefully that'll be fired up tomorrow. And then we've been mad flat out on CAD work, or George has to be specific. So the Stratos over there, we previously showed the sketches that George was doing of the basic design. So he got a photograph of the car, sketched over it to get the sort of agree the layout for the rear, which I explained before was designed so we could get some airflow out of there, have an actual glass window in there, but that was flat, not curved glass, to keep the cost of the manufacturer sensible. And we came up with a concept we were really happy with. So he's been taking that from that sort of sketched phase through to an actual 3D model. So he's 3D scanned the whole of the back of that aperture. From that scan data, built the entire part in CAD. We could then visually actually look at that in 3 dimensions, rotate it, look at the part, make sure we're happy with how it looked in 3D. And then from that CAD model, then design the mould tool, which will be like a 2-piece MDF tool that's basically CNC machined from MDF using the CAD model. And then we'll be able to lay that up in either fiberglass or carbon fibre into that mould to make the final part. And then that will be dependent on the surface finish. I think we're going to paint it. I think it will be probably a gloss black. Rather than exposed weave carbon. So we'll make that in carbon fibre or fiberglass, trim it all, trial fit it all, paint it, then we'll have a flat glass piece made that goes in there, which will be reasonably cost effective. So I'm looking forward to seeing that one take shape. And then on the E-Type, which is just the other side of the Stratos, more 3D scanning. We're planning a lot of the component design on that car to be done in CAD from the 3D scan data. So almost all the interior components will be designed in CAD virtually inside the 3D model, and then prototyped in 3D print, trialled in the car, and then usually either then CNC routed in MDF or machined in aluminium, or some parts might actually be 3D printed in their final guise if they're going to be upholstered, for instance. So at the moment we're just getting a 3D scan of the entire car nailed, so then we'll probably section it up later so we can work with different parts of it rather than trying to process the whole thing when we're actually building CAD parts. But that's where he's at with that at the moment, is just getting the whole scan of the car into the computer so we can then section parts out. So when we come to design, say the rear bumper for instance, we'll just cut out the back of the car, import that 3D scan as a model into CAD, and then we can build the bumper to that shape and then prototype it and then get it machined. So I'm really excited to see that process take shape, because that is definitely the most extent we've gone in terms of CAD design of parts. That car will be a new benchmark basically in terms of the amount of CAD design parts and how much of it will all be visualized in CAD first before we actually make any of the parts. So it's an adventurous one for us. You know, it's pushing, as we try and do with all the projects, it's pushing a little bit further for us. So yeah, I think that's covered it all. I feel like I've been waffling on for ages, so I better stop. The only thing I'm just going to touch on before we finish is a lot of people, rightly actually, questioned about the Mark 1 Escort and why we weren't just using a new body shell, because Motorsport Tools do a new shell for the Mark 1 Escort. And that meant to mention why he didn't. The reasons Fairly straightforward. The primary reason is there's a 12-month wait, and we can't wait 12 months. And obviously, we don't know that we need a new shell until we've blasted the donor car that we've got. So the 12 months wait pretty much rules it out anyway for us. But there's a small secondary, is that if we're building the car ourselves from panels, then we've got total quality control over how all the panels are put together, the alignment of everything, the quality of the welds, etc. Now, that's not to say they're not good on the motorsport tool shells. They may well be, we don't know, but we've not personally seen one. But it does mean that we have got total control, so we can be absolutely sure, even if there was a question mark, there won't be, because we've got control over it all. So they're the reasons. Essentially, number one, there's a 12 months wait, which rules it out. Number two, it's always nice to have quality control over the assembly of the entire car from start to finish. So yeah, that's where we're at. You'll have to join us next week. It feels like next week there'll probably be a nothing happen, because so much of it happened this week, but join us next week and you'll find out. Sorry, totally fucked you shot up.
You did a bit.